Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝗃𝗀𝘀𝗀. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, what do we got going on over there?
Nothing over here. I'm jealous of what I'm over here in quarantine, and you got to go out last night. How'd that event go?
It was good. There was two great events last night. Casey, who's our guest today, was at the Northwest Side Builders Coalition. I was unable to make it over there, but I was at the Windy City REI in Chicago multifamily. So RJ, Nikki, Chris, April, Alex, I'm probably leaving people off, but great event. Yeah, it's been like all real estate the last couple of days here. We had a refi, had that event, have a closing today, closing Monday. It feels like the real deal after being quiet for a while.
Nice. I can't wait to start getting back out again. I only got another week, but then it was still, this will come out at the end of the year, but I'm afraid to go out before Christmas. I don't want to get by anyone. I'm in quarantine right now because I was exposed to somebody that has it, and now I'm kind of stuck in the house. And it happened to me before Thanksgiving, and we couldn't go to Thanksgiving. So I want to. I'm nervous to go anywhere before Christmas at this point.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, just do you give it the extra couple of days just to be safe, right?
Yeah. So I don't know.
You'll be back out there.
January. I figured that was
the first.
January.
I will say that was the first thing everyone came up to me and said, "Where's Mark?" I didn't realize we were in everyone's eyes. Like, people like assume like we live together and hang out all the time.
All right. For anybody over 40, we're Eddie and Jobo, dude. That's who we are.
Yeah.
So
for our younger listeners, we'll link to Eddie and Jobo in the show notes. So, all right. What do we got for the housing provider tip of the week?
All right. So housing provider tip of the week. I think it's great when you have tenants that are decorating for holidays. They take some ownership and pride of where they live, and they might decorate for Christmas or Easter or Hanukkah, whatever it might be. But make sure you have something in place, or you're following up to make sure they take those things down. Yesterday an HOA called us out because someone still had dying pumpkins all over their balcony. So make sure that if you have whether it be a rule in your lease or just an eye on your property closer, to make sure that if they are putting holiday stuff out, encourage it, never discourage that, but make sure that they're cleaning up in an appropriate time. And usually an appropriate time might be a week or so after the holiday. We get in the springtime having to sometimes, March 1st, tell people like, hey, listen, those Christmas lights, we got to get those down. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. I also love like driving by one of the buildings and seeing that it's decorated. Like one I drove by yesterday, and all tenants had Christmas lights out, and I was like, oh, good job, guys. Yeah.
I love that. And I love the, when they start putting flowers out, and, they might do a little yard scaping. Those are, if you see a resident that's doing yard work, like taking care of a mulch bed or plant flowers, like do whatever you got to do to lock them in. If they want something to stay or whatever, do it. They're a good keeper.
Yeah, agree. All right, Mark, this is the best way to wrap up 2021. I feel we're going to dive into a lot of cool stats here. Our guest today. So first off, a shout out from 𝗏𝗏𝗶𝗵𝗵, who introduced us. So Roman, thank you for the introduction. But today's guest, we have the founder and the head of business development for Cityscape. So Steben Vance is the founder and CEO. He's an urban planner who creates apps and maps about transportation modes and land use patterns in Chicago. A UIC grad. Also worked at the Chicago Department of Transportation, Active Transportation Alliance, and Street Blog Chicago. And then 𝗤𝗃𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀, which is a great name, great last name. So he heads up their business development. A North Park grad. I think you are the first Viking on the show. My accountant is also a Viking. Director of Development and Community Engagement. His previous work was a Director of Development and Community Engagement for the Albany Park Community Center, and an Economic Development Consultant for the City of Chicago. So two guys who know a ton about urban planning, know a ton about the city, have a great product. We're going to dive into a lot of awesome stats. So Casey and Steben, welcome to the show. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for having us.
I am doing great because I am looking forward to the 20th ADU permit issued in 2021.
See, we're going to get into it. And I thought there'd be a zero behind that number.
Oh, yeah, I was hoping so too.
So, and as soon as we wrap up here, I'm going to go get the pumpkins off of my porch that Mark was talking about. Sorry, I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, that was you. So, all right, let's start at the very beginning. Most of our listeners probably haven't heard of Cityscape. Give us just a quick definition, like what is Cityscape, and then who uses the product?
Yeah, I can take that one and dive in. So Chicago Cityscape is a community and real estate information platform that aggregates hundreds of sources of data in one place, giving our members insights exclusively available on our platform that helps them save time while they're doing market analysis, site selection, and due diligence on properties. And then kind of like the who in that, as you asked, there's kind of like three big buckets. I would say it's like property professionals, like many of your listeners. So real estate investors, developers, and brokers, like folks you've had on the show, like 𝗦𝘃𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 and John Womack. But then also like service providers and material providers, like Prashant, the architect you had on, and Stacy Young at CIC are all members who use different data sets in our platform to do business development and lead generation. And then a lot of chambers of commerce, community development corporations, and SSA managers use Cityscape.
Got it. So, I'm assuming you're going to pull data from all these different places. The first question I think a lot of our listeners would have is, well, this is all public information. I can just do this myself. So what is the big advantage of turning to the Chicago Cityscape?
Yeah, I'll take that one too. And then Steven can add some even more light to it. So like last night I was at the Northwest Side Building Coalitions and somebody asked that. They said, well, I can get all this information publicly. And my response is a little tongue in cheek. I said, yeah, but you're going to do anything else that day? Like, I agree. Like you can find all of this in public record, but like if you're acquiring more than 2 properties a year, I think you have more important things to do than spending a ton of time in disparate and divorced government-run platforms and poorly managed websites. And Cityscape gives you information not available anywhere else. So if you need to know what development and financial incentives are available on a property, there's over 30 that are in our platform. If you need to know what proposed projects are coming down the pike that are going to like affect that market value down the road, that's in Cityscape and not available anywhere else. You can also look up, the history on taxes, sales, permits, and violations on a property.
Got it. So you're looking at an individual property, which I feel probably a lot of our listeners are at least at that level, but then you're also seeing the trends of other developments, permits issued in the area, et cetera, to just get a better idea for whether it be the neighborhood, the zip code, et cetera.
Yeah, so permits, but also zoning changes, proposed projects, transactions, public sector and private sector investment. That's that and hundreds of other data sources that are in there.
Awesome. All right, and we'll dive more into the product, but it's highly intriguing, especially someone like myself who just loves creeping on people and project. Like I feel anytime I go to do a flip, I feel I end up knowing everyone on the block there.
I've heard from our members we ruin many weekends. They're just, man, I just want to dive in and spend all weekend. I was like, well, go spend some time with your kids, but just get back to it on Monday morning.
So, all right, so let's talk about 2021. There's a lot that was going on. So, Stephen, Chicago everywhere saw a boom, right? Like everything was trending upwards. But which areas saw the highest increase in both sales and in development?
So I did a more qualitative analysis than a quantitative analysis because I want to make sure that we are also fulfilling our mission of making sure that we look at overlooked and underdeveloped neighborhoods. So when I wrote this report with MAP Strategies, which is a compliance company in Chicago, I made sure to check out the entire city in looking at where the new construction was happening. And so the first one in my list here is Bronzeville, and then also to a lesser extent, its neighbors, Washington Park and Woodlawn. And then I even took a bike ride down there in October to take pictures of all the new construction. And it's like amazing because I was biking down Calumet Avenue from like 43rd to 48th-ish. And it was just like condos over here, townhouses over here, single family homes over here, a new 3-flat, a new 4-flat. And I was like, this is all happening on 1 mile of one street in Bronzeville. And then in addition to that, I also pointed out some new construction in Portage Park and Jefferson Park, which have not always been on the map for the right reasons when it comes to new housing.
Yeah. All right. So now you hit a nerve with me. So I'm in. Let's dive into these developments that happened in Jeff Park. And they're, it took a while to get off the ground, right? The affordable housing aspect of it. A lot of people are up in arms, but can we dive into some of those? Yeah.
So 5150 Northwest Highway by Full Circle Communities, that's already built. And I believe people have already moved in. So that entitlement and development and community engagement process started like 3 or 4 years ago. And Jefferson Park and Portage Park have a lot of NIMBYism, and that's part of why it took so long to get to the stage where people can move into that building, which has 75 affordable units, with many of them for people who are veterans. And then more recently, you have the Clarendale in Portage Park, which is a senior housing high-rise with an Aldi on the ground floor. And so that's under construction. I'm looking at my picture here from August, and it's like already, I think, topped off at like 10 stories. But it's also at a massive intersection of Cicero Irving Park and Milwaukee. And so the scale is just fine. And then across the street from that, you have a former Sears store. And that, for several years, people were wondering what was going to happen to that. And a proposal came that didn't happen. And then Novak Construction bought it. And now they've gotten approval and have already started work on it. They were doing some partial demolition earlier this year, but they're going to be building, I forgot, but it's more than 100 apartments, I think about 200 apartments, and some ground floor retail as well.
Yep. And then for the Wicker Park people out there, that is the real Six Corners, Irving, Cicero, and Milwaukee. Portage is the real one. All right. So a lot going on. Did you foresee any of this? Meaning, like, just from looking at the trends, looking at the data that you guys have on hand, were you like, if we asked you in March, you say, hey, Bronzeville's like ready to pop? Just honest answer, like how much of this was unexpected, I guess.
So the Bronzeville stuff was half surprising because Dennis Rodkin at Cranes has been doing a great job of highlighting all the different top sales in Bronzeville over the last several years. Like, oh, it just hit $600,000. Oh, it's now $650,000 is the biggest sale in Bronzeville. And that's not necessarily a good look of the trend. It's just showing that, oh, people want to live in Bronzeville and they're willing to pay a lot. But it doesn't account for all of the, let's say the under the radar new development happening there that doesn't require zoning change. And so, yeah, I am kind of surprised that all of this happened on that street on Calumet Avenue, that none of it needed zoning changes. None of it needed a community or a ward level process. It all just showed up. Versus the stuff in Portage Park and Jefferson Park, those are larger projects and thus had to go through an involved entitlement process. So that was, you could foresee that years ago.
Yep.
Looking through the 2021 data, what were some of the biggest surprises you guys saw?
Well, I was hoping that there were going to be more accessory dwelling unit permits. So the accessory dwelling units, so we know of them as coach houses and basement units and granny flats in Chicago. And they were re-legalized by City Council in December of last year. And then you were able to submit a permit in May of this year. And so I was kind of hoping that there would be permits approved in May or June. But the first permits for new couch houses and basement units weren't approved or issued until September. And then it's just been like a slow drip from September until now. And only 19 permits have been issued so far. And so basically 6 months, 19 permits. That's not I didn't think they were going to run away this year, but I thought that there would be more than 20 or 19. And so I'm just hoping that we get to 20 by the end of the year. But next year, I hope that we hit 3 digits in the number of ADU permits.
Yeah. So quick comment there, because when you go to apply for it, you do need to pull full plans and permits. And in doing so, if you already have like the non-conforming, right? Someone lives down there. It's my understanding they're going to make you comply with the plans. Yes, it's a quicker process, but you're gonna have to dig down. You're gonna have to basically gut that thing. Am I wrong in that assumption? I think that's the biggest misconception is you can't just have this non-conforming unit and make it conforming. Like, you're gonna spend a lot of money on that rehab.
Yeah, so you have to make a basement unit comply with the current building code, and that includes adjusting the ceiling height. And adjusting the ceiling height in a basement means going downwards. But there are still a lot of 2 flats out there, mostly 2 flats, and some bungalows with the minimum ceiling height already achieved. And so that number is 7 feet between the finished floor and the finished ceiling. And so what I always recommend is that if you have a basement and it's unoccupied, grab a tape measure and go down there and measure the distance between the dirt or the concrete and the lowest point on the ceiling. And if that is a little bit over 7 feet, or then call an architect, and we've got a list of them who are capable of doing ADU projects. And then that, when you've got 7 feet, then you've already accomplished like the hardest part of doing a basement ADU.
Yep. Yeah, it's almost like it's better to have a vacant open place than one that's already finished, because you're gonna have to most likely tear it up anyways. Like you're almost better to not have a blank slate to walk into.
I agree.
So yeah, we'll see if those come more. What were some other surprises? So you mentioned the ADUs. Anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah. Office and commercial conversion to residential. I had started tracking these, I think, late last year or earlier this year. And like I just started a list of building permits that said converting 3 commercial storefronts to residential. I'm like, oh, I didn't notice this as much happening in 2020. And then I just kept this list going. And then when I looked at the list a week ago, because there was a conversation on Twitter about some of these happening, and also Dennis Rodkin again was talking about this on Cranes the other day or a week ago. And so I went ahead and I quantified that of how many office and commercial conversions to residential have been permitted this year without zoning changes. And it's 73 new apartments in 11 buildings. And I thought that was super high. That I had not noticed this in 2020. And like I said, I don't always do a qualitative, or I don't always do a quantitative. I mostly do qualitative. But in this case, I was like, wait, let me go back and actually compare the 2 years. And 2021, it was just through the roof compared to 2020 in the number of conversions. And I'm really happy about that, because it's just people taking advantage of their own properties and making sure that they're optimized and maximized. And also, I like new housing.
Got it. So I'm assuming we're going to see more of that, right? Like, given the high demand for residential and office, probably not as high demand. Like these conversions, I would assume are going to be continuing to trend in this direction.
I think so. So I think what's happening is that last year in March, COVID happened, and a lot of property owners, there was a lot of, let's say the market changed a bit with mortgage rates, with people moving, with people wanting to change their households. But then property owners at the same time were like, oh, let me take another look to make sure that my property is performing as well as it could. And part of that means taking a look at your zoning capacity. And so I think because all of these, or most of them, happened without zoning changes, because they were in B and C districts that allow apartments on the upper floors, that these property owners are taking advantage of something that was already there. And that is what I call unused zoning capacity, or what other people in the real estate industry call a value add. That it's just changing the property within the existing legal parameters of how you can use that property. Some people did get zoning changes to do the ground floor stuff, because most zoning districts in Chicago require ground floor commercial. So they did get a zoning change to allow them to do housing on the ground floor, which is great for a different reason, in that you can make them accessible. So there's this one property on the northwest side that had 7 commercial storefronts right in a row, and all 7 of them are being converted to accessible apartments. And I think that's great, because there's a huge lack of accessible housing.
And just so I'm clear, if you have a storefront, what does that zoning need to be where you can do that by right?
So by right, you need a B2 or a C2 zoning district to have housing on the ground floor.
Got it. All right. I've learned something new.
Yeah, that is good. For the, what areas still have room to grow in 2022, or even beyond that? Like, given the data you have at hand, where are you guys bullish?
I'm very bullish on Bronzeville still, especially near the Green Line. you can use Cityscape's Property Finder tool to really quickly identify vacant and underdeveloped and value add properties near any transit line, but the Green Line especially. And so the Green Line runs north-south through Bronzeville. It also runs east-west to the near west side, United Center and Garfield Park, and Austin all the way to Oak Park. But especially in Bronzeville, I think people are going to see some of the momentum from new construction that I already mentioned, but also there's a new transit-oriented development high-rise that's being built at the 43rd Green Line station that the city is also supporting through I think TIF, and they're also getting low-income housing tax credits. So that's going to be a big construction job. And so I think that plus the Calumet, which is like a block away, all builds for some new walkability, some new commercial opportunities. It's also close to King Drive, where you have all those historic houses. And then the transit options are just so good right there.
Yeah, it's crazy how close you are to downtown too. You don't realize it, like it's right there.
Yeah, the Green Line is a very fast train mostly because it's very straight, and there are a couple areas where there's just a big gap between stops, so it's not stopping every 4 blocks like the Brown Line does.
Yeah, it's like the Brown Line has a Wellington stop. I'm like, that's not even a busy street. It's crazy.
Stephen, I don't know if you have these numbers on hand, but it's also looking at in the area immediately surrounding that new Green Line station. There's assets there, which most people just think of as eyesores. By that, I mean, like there's vacant lots, there's developable land. There are properties that have additional development capacity there. And I think so many folks just overlook that, maybe because their perception of the aesthetics of the area. But I think there's a ton of room to grow, especially for TOD opportunities around the city, particularly where they're renovating parts of the Red Line and adding new stops on the Green Line.
So that new stop that Casey just is mentioning is the Damon stop at Lake Street, like 2 blocks northwest of the United Center. One of the development issues that I've talked about there on my blog is north of Lake Street, you have a planned manufacturing district. And so only south of Lake Street right there is their new residential development opportunities, but a lot of it is already taken up by CHA land. But the thing about adding new train stations is that it triggers us to take a second look at our land use policies. And so I think the PMD, which has a lot of vacancy, and PMDs are good because it helps preserve manufacturing jobs by lowering the cost of land. I think that there's some opportunity to adjust the boundaries of the PMD, especially near this new station at Damon that should start construction next year.
Great stuff, man. Mark, this is what we set out to do. Get really, really, really on the street knowledge of Chicago. This is great. All right, so we're talking about areas, but let's talk about just in general as investors. We're probably all looking at, this is medium home price. This is what rents are going for. But what are some of maybe the overlooked data points that you'd recommend our listeners dig into to try to find unforeseen value? Yeah,
Tom, you hit the nail on the head there. Like everybody kind of knows the formula. It's cap rate, comp sales, but there are some things that I think folks should look at that can add a different mix into that cocktail. So something we were talking about now, like looking at public sector investment and what is going to lead to increased value. So where is a train line expanding or going? Also, something else that was mentioned earlier in the call is like proposed projects and permits. It's great to see, if there's a mega development happening in a neighborhood, and you can know, of course, that's going to affect the market, but you can also look and see like how many like smaller permits are being pulled, and does it seem like that's increasing or simply decreasing to show other signs of like positive market momentum? Something we talk with our members about all the time is incentives. Cityscape aggregates over 30 different development, financial, and Community Reinvestment Act incentives all on our platform. I feel like folks should be looking at incentives as they consider acquiring property, and as they own and manage it, making sure that they're taking advantage of all the incentives that are available there.
It's great. I love it. Stephen, as far as ADU goes, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the pilot program runs for 3 years. Like, what are the gauges that the city's going to have to prove the pilot program to be a success? Like, what does that look like?
So they haven't set any gauges publicly. I've kind of set my own, like I said, 20 by the end of the year and 3 digits in 2022. The 3-year pilot program is basically a way to force the Department of Housing and Department of Planning and Development to pause and study what happened in the last 3 years. It doesn't mean that the ADUs are going to stop in 3 years or that the legalization will stop in 3 years. It's just a marker to take a review or an overview. It is up to City Council and those 2 departments to decide if they want to expand the 5 pilot areas where ADUs can be permitted beyond 5 or expand their boundaries. And so I've always been encouraging property owners, homeowners, and brokers to email their alderpersons saying, I want to build a coach house or I want to build a basement unit and I can't because this property that I own is not in an ADU pilot area. And actually this just happened last week. A woman emailed me and saying, hi, can you help me figure out like a zoning path for me to build a coach house for my elderly mother? And so I asked, well, what's your address? And she gave me her address and I looked it up and I verified that she had already looked it up and saw that it was not in a pilot area and I just needed to do it for myself. And I said, okay, well, you need to email the alderperson of the 39th Ward and tell her your story. And just make sure that alderpersons know why ADUs are so important to family members.
It's huge. Why the pilot program? Why those areas? I don't think we've ever asked that question on here. Like, why did they pick those particular swaths of the city?
So there are 5 pilot areas. I don't have all the neighborhoods offhand, but it's the north side, which is a lot of Uptown, Edgewater, Andersonville, I believe, and also North Center, and then the northwest side, the west side, the south side, and the southeast side. And the city the 2 departments, housing and planning, picked those because they represented, they were representative of Chicago. They had all the housing types of Chicago. They had all the income levels of people in Chicago. They had all the races and ethnicities of people in Chicago. So to make sure that when they did the pilot areas, because the purpose is to limit it and experiment. And also not every alderperson was on board and they wanted their wards carved out. So they had to come up with some boundaries. And so they just made sure that the boundaries they did draw had representation of the full breadth of people and buildings in Chicago.
Got it. So do you think, I mean, I'm asking a crystal ball here, but do you think 3 years from now, this will open up to other areas? Like, do you say like, hey, this thing failed, they're just going to leave it as is?
I think that they're going to open up to other areas because I see how successful ADU programs in other cities and other states are. And so Washington State, Oregon, and California all have ADUs legal statewide. Every city across all 3 of those states is required to allow ADUs. Now the cities each have their own ability to regulate ADUs in slightly different ways, but they all have to legalize them. And in some places it's been decades, and other places it's not. So Los Angeles has a great example. They legalized ADUs in about 2014 or 2015, and they had only a few dozen permits. Then the state legislature passed laws saying, okay, permits are taking too long, they're costing too much, cities are charging impact development fees, you can't do this. So the state passed a new statewide rule liberalizing ADU permits. Then it shot up. The number of permits in Los Angeles exploded. And then the advocates and legislators were like, no, this is still taking too long. We're not having the growth that we really need because housing is at crisis levels in California. So the state did another bill to further liberalize ADUs, and it exploded again. And so the idea of Chicago is that we kind of jumped ahead in a lot of those legal parameters to try to avoid these tiers of growth and just go directly to growth. but we still didn't do all of the recommendations to get to that point of, jumping straight ahead to growth. For example, you can't build a coach house on the ground level and have your required parking at the same time, because you're not allowed to park cars front to back. You have to park cars side to side. And that means that there's not enough room left over to build a ground floor coach house. And you want a ground floor coach house because you have an elderly parent who you don't want to have climbing the stairs every day.
Man, a lot that goes into this. In my head, I'm just like, come on, let us add units, right? It's a lot more complicated than my simple brain makes it.
Yeah, and the Urban Land Institute, which hosted a 9-month-long task force, which had a lot of city officials serving on it, and I was also on that task force. That was one of our goals, was to recommend policies and parameters that would kind of bypass all of these mistakes from other cities.
Got it. No, it makes sense. So a lot of our listeners probably hearing this like, wow, this is a lot of information. Maybe this can be useful to me. So I want to just go back to the actual product. So if I'm someone who I bought myself, a 4-unit, I'm looking at another property, I'm not that big of a player. Is Chicago Cityscape still something that can help me out in my journey? Or is there a certain scale where, yep, it starts to make sense? Like that person wouldn't buy a CoStar subscription, right? It's overkill. I'm just trying to get an idea of where you guys play, because after this episode, I'm assuming a lot of our listeners are going to be intrigued by the product.
Yeah. So what I've learned, bringing new members into the platform for over a year now, if someone's considering acquiring 2 or more properties a year, Cityscape can be a great fit for that. Because if you're acquiring more than 2, that means for every one you acquire, you're prospecting 10 to 15. That's a lot of time looking up tax history and comps and available incentives and violations and permits and kind of understanding the context of the community that you're about to invest in. If you got to do that 30 times,